Hi, Reality Riffing. I got the rare and incredible opportunity to sit down with my teacher, Harijiwan, to discuss some esoteric sciences and practices called parapsychology of the moving thought form, as well as face reading. These practices and skill sets are what I believe imperative in these complicated times, and they really offer a reality and an opportunity for any person, no matter where you've been and what you've been through, to not just kind of survive, but to thrive and to enjoy this precious human incarnation. For those of you who are new to these concepts, and oftentimes I don't talk a lot about Kundalini here on Reality Riffing, even though it's the center, the nucleus of my teachings and my practice. This is a really rare opportunity to get inside some of these both esoteric, but now more important than ever, skill sets to thrive and enjoy and succeed in a highly complex time on planet Earth. I hope you enjoy this very precious and important conversation that I had with my teacher, Harijiwan. Harijiwan, I notice you're going through a doorway. What does this tell us about face reading?
Thank you for asking. The face is the entryway into the energetic portal of that individual. And everybody's an individual, and everyone has their own kind of unique history. And how they've arranged that history is all kind of billboarded on the face. There's a key to unlock the quadrants of the face, or the sections of the face. And then because this computer, your computer, has downloaded millions of samples, you've seen millions of faces in your time on the planet. So all you need to know is the language of decoding what you've seen, what's already essentially stored on your hard drive. You have the experience. So all kind of facial recognition software, this computer is very capable of doing the exact same thing.
Wow, okay. I mean, the whole time I was trying to keep my face straight. I am very excited to be joined by the Grammy Award-winning artist Harijiwan, and the topics of discussion today are ones that are very esoteric, and Harijiwan holds a certain mastery in these realms. So I'm very excited to learn about parapsychology and face reading. Welcome, Harijiwan.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Gurjaga. I'm going to riff on reality. Is that our game here?
That's our game. That's how we play it. So I would love to just start with those who have never even heard the term parapsychology. I'd love to just get your definition of what parapsychology is.
Well, in real kind of concise language, para is kind of above, beyond. So it's beyond the normal psychology where we kind of use logic to move a person. You know, we kind of understand where they're at, and we try to convince them through a variety of ways to look at things or move themselves to a different point of view, a different position. The parapsychology uses other energy fields to move the person outside logic. So you essentially don't interlock with the thought form that has you essentially in the place where you are. So it's a more sophisticated movement of the psyche, and in the essence, that's what it's about.
And what, in your view, is important about these types of skill sets in times like these?
Well, in the computer age, where there's just constant data and instantaneous worldwide communication, it's very hard, if you're not clear on your identity, to get all swept away in all sorts of narratives that may or may not serve you. And so there's a kind of lack of center, a lack of your own kind of emotional consciousness base. And that gets people very anxious and gets them mentally scattered. And of course, they get emotional. And then that creates stress. And stress is, as everyone knows, the number one killer. So we have to have a kind of calm, peaceful, tranquil point of view in a very accelerated global scene. And that you have to essentially know how to get out of certain thought forms and not get pulled into certain thought forms.
So when you say thought form, can you describe just in a very simplistic way exactly what that is?
Well, there was the phenomenon that everyone's familiar with, which was this QAnon during that bounced around the globe, which was a kind of a political point of view, if you will, that everyone kind of the conspiracy crowd labeled it a conspiracy. So then everyone, of course, accepted it as such. But what it was essentially a counter narrative trying to give people some kind of cohesion and meaning to all sorts of events that are kind of constantly popping up on their screen. So what they do is they get caught in something that may or may be real, just as a try to make sense of things. So the thought form has essentially taken over my perception because I don't have the base to move from. And that's the kind of example of people that get all strung out in certain kind of levels of meaning, and then they get emotional about these levels of meaning, and they lose their kind of ability to function effectively and enjoy life. So that's a kind of esoteric conspiracy answer to your question, I think.
Interesting. There's this kind of saying or whatever that humans are meaning makers. How would you kind of put that in the parapsychology?
Well, the quick answer is, what do you mean by that? But uh, but your life has to have some purpose. And if you know what that purpose is and you're fulfilling that purpose, you're a happy person. If you're not sure what that purpose is, you're searching, and which is perfectly okay. But at a certain point, you've got to kind of figure out what you came to the planet to do and then start to do it. And if you're lost and confused, it makes for an unhappy existence. So I have to essentially clear out basically the programming I was given, that so I can find out what my kind of identity is and what my purpose is. And the parapsychology takes us beyond the realm of our conditional education, imprinted family, genetic, cultural systems, so I can actually find out who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. And when I find out what I'm supposed to be doing, then I enjoy life. And if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, then I struggle. And so it's trying to make people happier.
So, in the realm of just to kind of contextualize this in psychological history, Freud, Jung, they pop up with certain types of kind of concepts that we now know as modern psychiatry and therapy around the 1920s, or earlier. Um, can you kind of give us a little bit of a timeline of where you think parapsychology kind of fits into what most people have? We've all been, we've been to therapy, we've been to some sort of psychology class, or we majored in it in college. Like, where does parapsychology fit in this timeline?
Well, if I could just start by answering that with a little of my personal history. When I was a young man, I was in Freudian therapy for about 8 years. And then I realized the therapist had been dead for 7 of those years. I went, But at any rate, the whole notion was that as the Industrial Revolution arrived in the late 1800s, and there became essentially more time, to spend in your life. It wasn't so much about survival. There was some automation and some machines arrived, so your life was not purely spent just trying to survive. And so that came the for instance, novels appeared, and then movies appeared, and radio appeared, and things like this. So the entertainment kind of industry really began in the early part of the 1900s. And Freud arrives at this point he has a companion in his early research is called cocaine, but we kind of minimize that historically. Um, but and then started look into essentially the mental conditions, which and then we have the publication. Freud was an excellent writer, and of trying to understand why people are perceiving the world in certain ways. And the Mesner was a magnetism, kind of the first hypnosis gets kind of formally introduced and so forth. And then Jung comes along and adds in there's a whole nother level of the dream space that Freud is a famous interpretation of dreams, which is essentially the unconscious mind, what happens when we sleep. Now, the yogis, of course, have known this for thousands of years, but the general public was not privy to that kind of information. It's called very secret and esoteric. But Jung adds to Freud's interpretation of the dreams by saying there's a whole kind of collective unconscious, and there's certain thought forms inside that collective unconscious that he called archetypal forces. And then as we kind of get more sophisticated as we move forward in the 20th century, we come to the notion that there's a broadcasted consensus reality that we're kind of subscribing to. And you have the entry of other beings from other dimensions and so forth that becomes more publicly acknowledged, known for thousands of years, but more publicly acknowledged in the 20th century. So become the internal landscape as the humans become more kind of dominant in their external landscape with more machines and more kind of, let's say, creature comforts. Then the internal world becomes more intriguing, and it becomes more available. You essentially have the leisure time to explore it. And then around in the 1940s, you have the first kind of hallucinogenics getting on the street that chemically made. There's always been the kind of plant hallucinogenics for thousands of years. And people start exploring internally. And then when you come to the 1960s, there's certain astrological configurations that really point the psyche inward. And that's as it begins the transition from Piscean, 2,000 years of Piscean, where the psyche is outwardly directed, to the Aquarian, which is the psyche is internally directed. And that's the huge change of the age. So essentially the 100 or so, the Aquarian age started in 2012 formally. There's 100 or so years before that, the humans start to turn their psyche inward. So it's not just the village shaman and the elder wise man. It becomes more of a wider spread kind of search, if you will, in a cultural way. And that gives rise to the rock and roll and the drugs and so forth. And then what we call ancient kind of record keepers and wisdom keepers, so forth, start coming into the general population. And there's a whole big kind of renaissance of exploration of the internal world, which again is the Aquarian kind of positioning. The stars are positioned in such a way where the mind is internally directed. So you have on your smartphone more information than a person in the 1800s would ever have encountered in their lifetime. You have it right in your hand now. So there's now levels of different thought forms that are much more dominant in your perception, and you need to know how to navigate those because of the pressure they create on the psyche. And that creates a lot of people who are very anxious and get strung out. So it became very popular to medicate in some fashion the wider population, which is why we see the legalization of certain drugs and so forth, is because people need some kind of relief from the psychic pressure of all this data. And so how I organize all that data, how I organize the thoughts, that it gives me my success and happiness, or it gives me my misery and my suffering. So that's kind of a little overview of where we're at.
Fascinating. So now in a previous reality riffing, I interviewed a woman who basically is in the position that she is programming the programmers of artificial intelligence, and she's trying to program the programmers, these human people working with these humans who are programming artificial intelligence, with more empathy, more compassion, and more self-awareness. Where do you think parapsychology starts to fit into artificial intelligence?
Well, the artificial intelligence is you can what one easy way to kind of coexist with it is to just assume that it's always been here in a form. That the sun rises every morning and sets every night. You get darkness, at least where in parts of the world, and light in the morning. And you have certain storms, you have certain seasons. These are all running on very predictable patterns, and so therefore there's been some kind of if you will, extraordinary intelligence operating the planet Earth. It moves on an axis. There's tides at high and low tide and so forth. So, and then there's, of course, anomalies and where things go out of chaos with tornadoes and hurricanes. And there's certain seasons for those and so forth. So, to my mind, it's just easier to assume that we've always been coexisting with some kind of artificial intelligence. We've now named it that, but we used to call it Mother Nature or something like this. So, and we found that it's just a better and more enjoyable life if you look for what's positive, what's useful, what's kind of the love force as opposed to the fear force. There's two forces: negative is fear, positive is love. And so if I approach the nature with a loving position as opposed to a fearful position, I get along with it better. If I approach the artificial intelligence from a loving position, I get along with it better. But I have to be able to filter out my thought forms, because my emotional body will generate certain protective responses and certain fears. And so you can have a fear of the artificial intelligence, like you could have a fear that the sun might not go down tonight and might not get dark, in which case, what am I going to do? So you have to have a kind of coordinate your own perception to fit it into the time that you live in. So there was a fear of computers, there's a fear of 5G, there's a fear of of vaccines. There's all sorts of fears out there, but they don't serve you well if you're got on that frequency. So it's basically getting yourself on a positive frequency, dealing with the environment that you happen to be in. So we have a fear of flying, or fear of automotive cars and all these type of things that don't make for a functional and enjoyable existence.
So say I have some sort of phobia, fear, or issue, and I've done some sort of spiritual work on it, and I feel like I've gotten over that issue. Then something happens, I'm pressurized, or a challenge comes up, and that issue comes back up, and I think, well, I thought I was done with this issue. How to use parapsychology? What is a simple kind of way that you can start to think of parapsychology in a moment like that, which we've all been in those moments where we thought we got over something?
Well, my crown chakra is constantly downloading streams of thoughts, and the streams of thoughts then are positive, because I only can follow one feeling, emotion, desire to action. So all the other thoughts get deposited in what we call the holding area, called subconscious. So unless I've completely obliterated that thought form, it's kind of then it's deactivated until there's environmental pressure, which essentially directs my crown chakra to download that old stream of thoughts. So the parapsychology says that we have mantras in the Kundalini system. We have mudras, postures in the Kundalini system. We have sounds in the Kundalini system. Of course, the supreme tool we have is the gong, that will go in and obliterate that particular thought form, so it's not there to cue up a downloading stream of thoughts when environmental pressure comes and starts kind of pressuring you. So that's the key to it. But this science is not well known, or is barely known. So people don't understand it in that way. So you have, for instance, is someone who gets off heroin. There was that famous case of that actor Seymour Hoffman, I think his name was, who had been a heroin addict and then had been clean, sober for a decade or more. I think I have that right. And then he ran into some relationship issues, which then created some, he was isolated. And so the environment essentially re-triggered the old addictive, destructive pattern. And then the thoughts, of course, start streaming in because that pattern had never been completely obliterated. It had just been deactivated, even though it had been deactivated for a decade or more. And the outside environmental pressure he started using again, he overdosed and died. So that's a case of not having a sophisticated enough system to clean out that toxic thought form, and then you're vulnerable. But that's why we have to, everyone has to be careful and vigilant about what they're kind of, how they're positioning their psyche. And parapsychology gives you a kind of the beyond position, if you will, where I don't have to logically go toe to toe with the toxic thought form. See, and then I'm just essentially I spend my life trying to be on the positive side of the negative thought form. I'm always an alcoholic, and I try to be sober one more day at a time. I'm still toe to toe, face to face with the toxic thought form. I haven't gone beyond it. And the parapsychology is the tools to take us beyond it. And again, what's going to prove that it works is your experience. And that's why we want to teach this. And we have teach it at length, so people have a very experiential understanding of it, of really how to move out of these toxic locations and then be free of them, because the human has the absolute capacity to be free. The human there's no one needs to be imprisoned by anything that happened to him in the past, any conditioning, any programming, any behavior. They don't need to be imprisoned by that, but they've got to use the right tools and the right technology to get safely out of harm's way. And we know in the Kundalini system, we have those techniques.
So there's a collective toxic thought form, especially in the new age scene, called, they like to use this term, spiritual bypassing. It's my belief that that's in some way kind of a psyop to keep people from actually being able to understand that they can get free of whatever it is that's ailing them. I mean, what's your opinion on this?
Someone told me that. I heard about that, the bypass thing. I thought it was absurd. But I then understood that it was widely out there. It's ridiculous. And a psyop, because if you're trying to rule the planet, why do you want people to be free of these toxic thought forms, right? You have to understand there's hostile forces on the planet and with their own agendas. So why would I want you to stop, taking drugs and being a zombie in pain? Because it's much easier to rule dummies than it is to rule smart people. So I think that's definitely every system is kind of infiltrated with people who are trying to push the other point of view for their own personal ends. So yeah, spiritual bypass is an absurd notion, which we've discussed in some of the previous trainings. I got in a car accident. The car rolled off the highway. So what I did is I called someone to come and explain to me why I did that. And then we discussed what had happened in my past that caused me to make that error in driving. And then so I could understand more clearly why I made that error, we got a group of people who had made similar error, and we would meet there at the car wreck. Everyone would describe their particular accident, so we could feel a camaraderie and a bonding. And we did that for several years before it finally dawned on me that maybe we should just get out of the ditch and move on. So, but it's been a long journey, I'll tell you. And the group thought I was trying to bypass The accident. But after 22 years of sitting there talking about it, I felt that there was better things to do in life than keep analyzing a bad day at the track. So
Yeah.
it's
There,
tough
there.
out there. It's tough out there.
So let's kind of bring in this face reading and where face reading intersects with parapsychology.
Well, the face reading is fascinating because you have to identify where you are before you can figure out where you need to go. And if you don't know where you are, then you're not going to go anywhere, because every journey has to have a starting point. So you need to know where you are, and then so from there you can figure out where you need to go. And we have the Kundalini transportation system, but I have to figure out where do I get on the transportation system and what destination am I at least heading towards. So that's the notion. Otherwise, you're kind of practicing in the blind. And my teacher had a famous quote. He said, "We offer the teaching so you don't tie a blindfold around your eyes, wander around at night, fall in a ditch, and then say it's God's will." So this is the face reading comes into this very essentially. Once I at some point I made a decision to take incarnation. And then from that incarnational move, I found a womb, and which had a family around it, right? And then I entered into that womb and that mother, and then out from the womb into a family environment, into a social, economic environment, a cultural environment. And all along the way, I'm making a series of decisions that are determining my response to those movements or that decision. Essentially, why did I land in that family, in that economic environment, in that cultural environment? And my response, so if something negative happens, like say there's an earthquake. I'm in Los Angeles. So if there's an earthquake, the first thing that's a natural, because you have a circumvent field, an aura around you, when the environment outside is negative, you freeze. So if the room starts to shake right now, my first reaction is go still to try to figure out what's happening, right? If there was like a gunshot or something like that. So when I freeze, that's where the arrests happen. So my development gets kind of frozen at that point. So if I come out of the womb and it doesn't look like my caretakers care about me, then I freeze, because I have to survive, and I have to make a decision if I want to survive. And then I'm looking for love and support. And if I'm not finding that, there's a kind of a stop. And what do I do next? How am I going to get fed? How am I going to get shelter? So these arrests are built into the magnetic kind of imprint system, and they're visible on my face, most readily visible, as opposed to my astrology or my numerology or my palmistry. So in other words, if there's a frightening situation, I'll just go, okay, so I've kind of tightened my lower mouth, right? In like a response of, okay, so now if I do that micro movement thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times, I build a certain pattern of expression. So layered in that expression is that initial kind of arrest, which was because there's no food tonight. And so that is now built into my face. And so then I essentially are sending out a magnetic signal into the environment, which like, the environment is always showing up without what it's supposed to provide. And my relationships are not providing what they're supposed to provide, because I'm essentially magnetically asking for that. And unless I know how to disassemble this pattern so I'm relaxed and flowing with things and have an expectation that there's going to be food and support, Then I'm going to keep getting, I'm going to have the original cast or stand-ins for the original cast is all I'm going to magnetically attract. So by understanding where I had the arrest, then I can start to dismantle it and have essentially get on a more beneficial magnetic current. So a relaxed person, the things come to them because they're not blocking it. And so we've all built in a series of these kind of responses, which are visible to the trained eye very readily on the face. So we offer the Kundalini technology to show you how to erase that particular response and its layered magnetic experiences so that you can be free of that and basically have the freedom to make a new set of decisions and get a new response from the environment or from the relationship you're in or the career you've chosen and so forth. So that's kind of how that comes. So I'm essentially parapsychology. I'm getting the psychologist says, let's figure out what that particular arrest was. And you essentially, as I say, go toe to toe with it. And you logically try to analyze it and talk it out so I can come to a more comfortable resolution of that particular stance. The parapsychologist says you can remove that stance and create a new stance. That's the difference between the two systems. And because the psychological system, after 100 years or so, realized that it's not really working that well, so that entered the drug dealers, the pharmaceutical crowd, who says, we can't get rid of your particular arrest and its resulting experience, but we can give you a drug so you won't feel it as much or remember it as much. And that, of course, lessens your energy field, gives you less ability to maneuver out of the problematic place in the beginning. And if I share my own personal experience, by the side of the road, those 20 some odd years, having my group discussion about why I drove into a ditch, at one point, the group suggested, why don't we all just get stoned? Because then it won't feel like we're in the ditch anymore. And that's when I got into all the acid and the ayahuasca and all that other stuff. So we spent several years not knowing where we were. Then we ran out of money to buy the drugs, so we went back to talking about how good the drugs were, and then we remembered that actually we were still in the ditch. That's when I left. That's when I found Kundalini, actually.
And I just want to reiterate this point because I think it's really, I mean, it's groundbreaking for so many that in order to move whatever that arrest is or thought form, you do not need to know or spend any time on the content of what, why, how, where, etc. Am I right about this?
I later met a guy at it was a Rama festival, actually, who told me he drove into a ditch in his car and he realized that this is not a good place. So he just walked out of the ditch, put his thumb out and was picked up. And he got out of there and he had a great life. And he was only down in that ditch for a few minutes.
Right.
I said, did you know how you got out of the ditch? He says, who cares? I got out of there. So absolutely, yes, that's correct. You can completely move out of a dangerous, harmful, painful, problematic, limiting situation. You don't need the object is where you're going. Because it's not regressing you back. That like I like where you're coming from, is that's one phrase, and then the other clowns who say I like where you've been. Well, we want you going somewhere. So at the end of the day, people go, well, we like where you went.
I have one more question about this kind of arrest, how these arrests show up. I've noticed that they show up as well as in the face. They show up also in the sound current. Can you speak to that? That you hear certain arrests of the parapsychology in the sound current of how someone talks.
The whole game is played with sound. I mean, the whole universe exists on a sound vibration. So the sound is absolutely essential to creating reality. and whatever your particular sound is going to essentially is to send out the vibration that's going to give the signal that's what's going to come towards you, or essentially what's going to avoid you. So in the science of Kundalini yoga, we use the sound and the mantra system extensively, because that is the quickest, surest, most complete, precise way to create energetic form. And absolutely, you can tune into where a person's, how they sound will tell you kind of, is where they're coming from. And you can hear certain kind of experiences in the sound current that we one huge kind of improvement you'll notice people's, well, one thing you'll notice absolutely, the face changes, usually it starts to look younger and healthier. Two, the sound has more resonance, it has more body, it has more power, it has more vibration, and that's makes for a happy person. You can you can go back. Once upon a time, people dined in restaurants and tables were next to them. People read about this in history books, but in a pre-COVID world, and you can listen to the people at the other tables, and you can tell if that's a happy person, or that's an unhappy person, or if that's a frightened person, or a peaceful person. It's all completely in the sound current. Now all these talking heads on TV, they're hired for their look, and they all speak in a certain kind of computerized voice. That's to prepare you for the AI overlords that are coming. But well, now it's all Siri. It's all about some lady. Um,
Well, thank you so much for this. I mean, it's such an intriguing topic and very kind of esoteric opportunity to go into these teachings. Next week, May 10th through the 16th, we're going to spend 7 days looking in to this treasure trove. Any closing comments on this?
well, the thing is that you're so programmed by the culture and the media and the educational system that you're kind of stuck in a certain place, and we want to make it more palatable, more comfortable, more manageable. And the Kundalini and the parapsychologist doesn't buy that particular point of view. Their opinion is that you can pretty much go wherever you want, and no one is trapped, and no one is limited, and certainly no one is limited in any way, shape, or form by some prior behavior, some prior experience, because you're constantly in a state of, the cells are constantly changing, your magnetic field is constantly changing, and if we put the right direction in there, then you can move at whatever pace you feel comfortable with. But the face reading is one essential tool, because if I get something stuck in my hair, I need somebody to go behind me and untangle it, because I can't see it, and I can't reach it. So I need some help in order to get that out of that particular knot that's blocking, the free flowing movement that I like. So we want to spend about 7 days teaching this, and we're very, at Rama, we're very big on the experiential aspect of it. You have to have an experience of some major movement in your own psyche and in your own experience during the course of the training, because that shows that it works. So it's not book learning in that way, because if I add a book learning, if you will, I'm adding more information to my existing position, but I'm not changing my existing position. So, the whole thing is to change my existing position, and that's what we have. We have the tools, we have the technology, and we have the experience to do it.
And
And and one other thing, I'm excited also to do the course, because we're looking to move at some point into Rama University, and we want to get some of these teachings out that we really haven't taught much, because they said Jesus, was a very fine teacher. In academic world, they say Jesus is a very fine teacher, but he didn't publish.
yeah, exactly. um, And I like this quote of a great yogi, your teacher. Basically, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but philosophy is nice, but it doesn't pay the bills. Parapsychology pays the bills.
Yeah. Now, everybody, no matter what your kind of background is, your IQ level, vibrational level, experiential, everybody has a chance to move in a better direction. Absolutely, everybody has a chance. And we want to teach you to move better in a better position so you can also teach others how to move in a better position. And that makes the world a better place for you, and it makes it a better place for everyone who you can help. And that's our kind of goal, is to get these teachings out so that people can improve their lives.
Thank you so much, Harijiwan. And you can find Harijiwan at harijiwan.com and on Instagram at Harijiwan. And all of the information on the upcoming training will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on Reality Riffing. Really amazing.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
These are very esoteric teachings of the mind, the parapsychology of moving thought forms. My teacher was one of the only masters on the planet who knew this science, and he taught it to me, and it's now come time for me to share what I know.
Pavan Guru, Pavana Pavana, Pavana Pavana, Para Para, Pavan Guru, Pavana Pavana, Pavana Pavana, Para Para, Pavan Guru.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Reality Riffing. These are conversations that I think are important with people who are doing great things in the world about subject matters that need to be discussed. If you enjoyed the content, the conversation, please feel free to share with your people, share with your friends and family, rate the podcast below, and also subscribe.